Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding Westworld, an unofficial podcast about the HBO original series Westworld. I'm David Chen.
I'm Joanna Robinson.
And welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. What we do here on this podcast, we will recap this week's episode of Westworld. We'll spoil everything through the episode. We won't spoil anything from future week's episodes. That includes anything on the next time on preview that HBO shows. You can find more episodes of the podcast at decodingwestworld.com. You can also email us at decodingwestworld@gmail.com. Joanna Robinson and I are here super early on Monday morning. It's like 7 a.m. Pacific time Monday morning to bring you this episode because that's how much we love you guys.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Yeah, seriously. It is Halloween. It's 7 a.m. Most people are sleeping. We're recording about Westworld. But we're happy to do it because last night's episode dropped some pretty awesome new information. But before we get to that, we got to follow up on a bunch of things. Firstly, I just want to say one thing of appreciation for my co-host Joanna here, which is that Joanna has actually received the next two episodes of the show, like many critics have already done, and has chosen not to watch them. So at this point, Joanna's knowledge of the show is concurrent with everyone else's knowledge, like who's watching normally on HBO, right? So, Joanna, how difficult was it to resist the urge to watch the future episodes?
Well, we actually have to thank friend of the show, Matt Patches, because he's the one who floated this idea past me. He's like, I don't want to watch in advance because I want to keep having fun theorizing, and it's no fun theorizing if you actually know what's going to happen. And I was like, that's true. I love theorizing. So, I just wanted to be able to talk about the show freely without dancing around anything. So,
that's right. So that's a very meta piece of commentary on this podcast, but just know that I am very grateful for that, Joanna, because it's some. I would probably do it, if I were you. Like, I'd probably do it, for the sake of the show, quote unquote. But it would be difficult, and I'd probably be pretty bitter and resentful about it. So I'm very grateful for you making that sacrifice for us.
No, I was talking about this, we have a lot to get to, so I won't dwell too long in this, but I was talking about this at a party on Saturday. Someone asked me, do I like Westworld? And I admitted that when I watched the first 4 episodes by myself, I was sort of okay on it. But ever since we started this podcast, this is going to sound like me kissing the ass of our listeners, but we have this discussion and everyone's emailing us and tweeting us and writing it and all this stuff. It's more interesting to me to be part of a discussion. It's kind of lonely to watch all these episodes by yourself and then have this knowledge that you can't share with people. So yes. I actually don't think it's that selfless. I think it's selfishly, I want to experience it along with you guys and be part of the conversation. So.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Joanna. The water is warm. All right, so we got to follow up on just a few things, and of course, there's a bunch of follow-up that we're going to save until the very end of this episode when we talk about theories. Like, what we're going to do is we're going to recap the show and then talk about crazy-ass theories, including one that Joanna Robinson floated last night at VanityFair.com. And I should also say that a few people have messaged us saying that the format of the show that we are electing to use, when I started the show, I thought, hey, Joanna, let's experiment with different formats for the show, because we've done other TV recap podcasts. Let's try a different format where we don't recap the show. We don't go scene by scene or plotline by plotline. Some people have actually messaged us saying, hey, they like the classic, recap each storyline format. And so that's what we're going to do in this episode, and then follow it up by getting some theories out there. But there is some follow-up that we want to get to right now. One is that Michael wrote into decodingwestworld@gmail.com, and if you could let us know where you're writing from, that'd be great. Michael wrote in, personally, I couldn't care less about where Westworld is located, but I have not seen this talked about. When Elsie is talking about the markings of Orion with Stubbs, she looks straight up into the sky, which means they are on Earth. And they can't be underground either. She would know she can trust what is in the sky as far as the stars. Boom. Thanks. So Mike points out that, that they are likely on Earth because when she's talking about Orion, she looks up in the sky, which is a constellation visible from Earth. And if you were on Mars, it probably wouldn't look quite the same. Furthermore, in last week's episode, there's a scene, or a shot, I should say, where Dolores is looking straight into the moon. And, maybe it's like you even see a close-up of the moon that then transitions into like a light in the underground bunker or whatever. And it could be possible that they're in some kind of Truman Show-esque dome, but also could just be the moon. So it feels pretty likely that they're on Earth. But as we said, not a super interesting question. Like if it reveals that they're on Mars, it's not going to really change your understanding of things. But since it is something that people seem to be debating, just wanted to throw it out there. All right, what else in the follow-up thing? Oh, the financials of Westworld. So there's a question of whether a park like Westworld could actually survive, given its economics. And some people have done the math. So let's see. David from the United Kingdom writes in, I wanted to pick up on something Joanna mentioned in your episode 4 podcast about how an accountant friend of hers was doubting the financial viability of Westworld. Firstly, I agree with Joanna that it seems probable that they have outside investment, but I was working out the actual revenue of the park, sad, I know, and even though we have no idea what inflation needs to be when applied, I still think that the revenue of the park is sufficient. In episode 1, when they were talking about recalling the hosts because of the defect in the update, either Cullen or Sizemore states that there are 1,400 visitors in the park at that moment. If we accept that this is the average that the park has at any one time, and that the average stay costs $40,000 per day, which is a piece of information revealed, I think, in episode 3 or 4, then just from the visits, the park has a revenue of over $20 billion per year. To put that into context, all of Disney Worlds around the globe have an annual revenue of approximately $4 billion. It's impossible to say, but it looks like the park would generate enough revenue to operate. That email comes in from David from the UK. Joanna Robinson, what did your accountant friend have a response to that?
So I forwarded this to my accountant friend, and he says, I remain unconvinced the numbers don't stand up to scrutiny. I mean, does this mean some poor saps are paying $40,000 per person per day for a family of 4 just to go whitewater rafting and horseback riding and eat barbecue served by a robot waitress at the saloon? And so then their $1 million for a 6-day family vacation is going to subsidize all the investment bankers who shoot holes in and blow the faces off dozens of more advanced and realistic AI robots, some of the most advanced and realistic AI robots ever made, who, despite being shot whenever and however, apparently never have their personality and memory circuits damaged. And somehow the books balance in the end. Disney has a fireworks show every night, but they don't have to rebuild the animation pirates and presidents just because some guests were encouraged to shoot and rape them. So I guess his counter argument is, if the financials do work out, the gentle visitors to Westworld are really getting a ripoff because they are underwriting the rapists and the shooters. So
I mean, it's like people who go to Disney World and don't do anything except maybe like eat at the restaurants and look at things, you know?
I guess, yeah.
But I think your friend has a good point in that the cost structure is probably pretty intense. I mean, you have all these R&D folks, you have narrative people, you have people who are doing repairs, and then actual like physical parts and labor that need to be used to get the park back into working order again. So, it makes a lot more money than Disney World, but it probably costs a lot more than Disney World to maintain as well.
And we can talk about this when we get into the recap, but they did address the financials of Westworld in this episode.
Yeah.
But the question is, the financials of when in Westworld's history?
Yeah. So usually we save the theories until the end. And we still will this time, but this episode, more than any other, is one that really does make you feel like you need to kind of have some understanding of when this takes place in order for even the show to be narratively satisfying at this point, I think. Because if the show is in fact taking place in 2 different timelines, then it calls into question that some of the plot developments and character developments we're seeing are not actually happening like in present day. And then that makes it less satisfying if you find out that's the case. But we'll delve into that. Why don't we just dive into the episode? You can always email us, I should say, at decodingwestworld@gmail.com. I do want to give one shout out before we get into the actual recap itself, which is that we learned this week that some very talented culinary artists listen to the show, Joanna. You could even call them top chefs listen to the show. And we just want to say I'm a big fan of that show, Top Chefs, and leave it at that. Okay. So let's move on. Let's begin with talking about what happened with Ford this week. The episode begins with Ford having a conversation with Old Bill, which is one of the older robots. And Ford tells the story of how a greyhound his father bought for him and his brother was used to actually accidentally kill a real-life cat. And it's a kind of haunting story that Anthony Hopkins, as the character Ford, tells about like what happens, afterwards. Like what happens when the dog finally catches the car or the cat in this case. And he, like the greyhound, didn't know what to do with himself. And that dog had spent its whole life trying to catch that thing, and it now had no idea what to do. And then, really great moment. You see how old the old cowboy character is, old Bill character is, like as a robotic piece of technology. He doesn't seem to react in nearly as human-like way as any of the other robots.
Yeah.
And then the scene kind of ends. Now, what do you think this scene is trying to tell us, Joanna?
I think it's a pretty, straightforward parallel to like Dolores being a robot on a loop, like a greyhound on a track, and what happens when the thing that's bred to just do one simple loop goes off its loop. It probably will kill your cat, I guess, is the moral of the story there, right?
I just had a random other take home from it, which is like, could it be referring to the Man in Black, who's doggedly pursuing this maze at all costs, and then when he finds it, he's going to find that it's not
also true.
What he's looking for.
I think that's also true, yeah.
Yeah, so it could be either of those. But basically, what this show is trying to tell you, and this scene is trying to tell you, is don't pursue your dreams, because it will end up leading to failure or disappointment, I think, is ultimately the goal of what the message is here. So, and we see Ford and the Man in Black confront each other later. We'll get to that. But later on in the episode, seemingly out of nowhere, Ford and Dolores also have a conversation, right? And Ford says a bunch of vague things. He says, "You're in my dream," and when Dolores tries to tell him that dreams are meaningless, he says, no, dreams are actually, they tell us who we are and who we may become. And then he reveals information about what was going on with Arnold. Like, he asks her when she last spoke with Arnold. She says it was 34 years ago. So we know that stuff that happened with Arnold happened 34 years before modern-day Ford.
Right?
And what did Arnold ask Dolores to do? Quote, he told me I was going to help him destroy this place, end quote. And Ford muses on like what it means to be a hero or a villain. And then when Ford leaves, Dolores keeps talking as if to Arnold, as if she is still under Arnold's control. So a lot of stuff going on here. Like, we don't know exactly what Dolores is... what side Dolores is playing. I think one thing that's very clear is that between Dolores and Maeve, these robots are now operating of their own volition in some ways. They are disregarding the programming that's been given them, or they are obeying like higher order programming from potentially Arnold. Any other thoughts on this scene, Joanna?
I thought it was a great scene. And I think it's really interesting. I think you see a lot of poignancy with Ford. I mean, I think after last week and some of the events of this week, or watching him cut up a robot's face, it's easy to think of Ford as like this sort of heartless guy with a god complex. But to see him have like such nostalgia, it feels like, for his co-creator, and also to reveal the vulnerability, like his own daddy issues. Like, daddy issues are basically why he built Westworld, right? Like, my dad said, I basically had to stay on my loop, is what my dad said. I have to stay in my place, but I built a world where I'm God, so shows him. So yeah, I just thought all that was kind of revelatory of Ford's personality and motivation.
It was nice. We will get to the timing of this scene later on, because we see a lot of these diagnostic scenes placed strategically throughout these episodes. Last week, the episode opened with a diagnostic scene between Bernard and Dolores. This week, Dolores collapses at a Day of the Dead parade, only to be seemingly woken up by Ford. But I don't think these scenes are all taking place in the order in which we see them. Would you agree with that? Yes. Yeah. So we then cut to Dolores. She appears to be in a graveyard, and she hears a voice that says, "Find me." And then she says, like, "Show me how." And then that's when we realize, actually, this is still within the context of the William and Logan storyline. And her and William and Logan with Slim ride into the town of Pariah to meet El Lazo, which I think someone pointed out last week means the loop, right?
Sure does.
In Spanish. So we had never really met El Lazo until this point. Like no one knew who El Lazo was. And when they enter the town of Pariah, Logan gives an exposition dump that's set to B-roll of all the crazy stuff going on in Pariah.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can read to you from the exposition dump here, because I think it's pretty important. Let's see. Here we go. So, some of the park feels like it was designed by committee or market tested, but everything out here is more raw, but it doesn't come cheap. Rumor is they are hemorrhaging cash. We're considering buying them out. Supposedly, this place was all started by a partnership, and then right before the park opened, one of the partners killed himself, sent the park into a freefall. I mean, I don't know any of the details. I don't even know his name. And then William says, "You must have a team of lawyers looking at this place." Logan says, "Yeah, well, they came up empty. He's a complete mystery. Not even a picture." Not even a picture, Joanna.
Not even a picture, but we've seen a picture. What? Yeah.
So, what do you think about what's going on here? I mean, go ahead.
Well, and we'll talk about this more later, but to me, if we are looking at this as two different timelines, let's say we've got a 34-year range from when Arnold died to when Dolores is getting interviewed by Ford, I would put, my estimation, though there are no concrete lines of dialogue in the scene to put it there, I would put this at, like, let's say 30 years ago. Like, it feels like this conversation, or maybe even like 33 years ago, it seems like this conversation is very recently after Arnold's death. That's what it sounded like to my ears. Now, granted, I'm like looking for things, confirmation bias, looking for things that confirm this theory, but it sounds to me like Logan's talking about Arnold passed away somewhat recently. The company is in financial disarray. His company is considering buying it. Maybe that company is Delos, and maybe 30 years down the road, Logan, if he's still alive, or William, if he's still alive, is like the major shareholder owner of Westworld. And if Logan or William, probably William, is Ed Harris, and that would explain why Ed Harris is free reign in the park if he's essentially the owner of the park, right?
Right. I will say my rebuttal to that is not to contradict you, but just to say I don't think anything that Logan says disqualifies the theory that this is taking place due to different timelines. Like, he could easily be referring to an event that happened 3 years ago. He could also be referring to an event that happened, 30 years ago. It's probably more likely that it's like 3 or 4 years ago, but I don't see any. Like, I just read the dialogue to you. I don't think there's anything there that indicates that, like, it's happened decades ago or that it happened a few years ago. Like, it could be either way. It doesn't eliminate either of the theories. Now, if he had said 30 years ago, then we probably would think that would that have removed the doubt from your mind that this is
I think so. Yeah.
But he didn't say 30 years ago.
He did not.
He didn't actually say. He said right before the park opened, one of the partners killed himself. So
yeah.
I don't know any of the details. I don't even know his name. It's funny how he says, like, I don't even know his name. Like, it felt a little bit stilted to me. Like,
definitely.
We know his name. It's Arnold. And he's like, I don't even have a picture. Well, we've seen the picture in present day with Ford. Like, why would he say those things unless, there's something that they were trying to tip their hand, like, somehow with that line of dialogue. So then later on, Dolores has visions of herself. Like, she sees other versions of herself throughout this episode. Yeah. There's a moment when she sees herself, like, in a parade walking along, and then later she sees a fortune teller version of herself. Any idea what these visions of herself are, Joanna? Because some have speculated maybe there's other versions of hosts, like, different hosts walking around the park, which I don't think is true. That doesn't make any sense to me, because, like, it would seems like it would generate a lot of confusion. It seems to me like this is just all part of Dolores's consciousness developing and maybe witnessing other, like, this goes back to the episode 2 or 3 when they're talking about, like, what are the voices, like, you hopefully perceive the voices as from you, and it's part of, like, her journey to consciousness. What do you think?
I think it's either part of Dolores sort of like melting down a little bit, or if you want to go again to, I apologize, the 30-year timeline theory, it could be her remembering being there before. Obviously not as a fortune teller thing, because that's her seeing herself as a different character. But in the parade scene, it was almost like, how many times has she been in that parade? Sometimes at the parade is she in the parade. Sometimes at the parade is she watching the parade.
Right. So in this instance, the park has opened a few years ago, and she's seeing past versions of herself in the park, right?
I definitely think so.
Yeah.
I think that there's let's say there's a 4-year buffer between when Arnold died and Logan and William had that conversation. Let's just say she would have done things in those past 4 years and could remember them. I don't know.
No, she's at this Day of the Dead parade, and then she seems to pass out. And then the next scene we see is of her and Ford. And then the next scene, she's talking with William, and William says something like, "Oh, you seemed like kind of out of it last night." What happened there? Like, did she pass out, and then William just was like, "Oh, I can't find her." Like, did Ford take her in, and then William's like, "Well, I can't find her, so."
We do hear vaguely on the soundtrack, like, whatever the command is, "May you dream a deep and dreamless slumber," or whatever. You hear Anthony Hopkins' voice very faintly saying that on the soundtrack of the Day of the Dead parade. So, in theory, she passes out. But, like, yeah, if William wasn't, like, did William see her do that? I mean, there's a lot of questions. And a lot of people are wondering if these interviews with Ford or Bernard actually physically take place backstage in Delos, or if it's some sort of, like link between the robots in play and, like, a robot that looks like them behind the scenes, or does it all take place inside their robot heads? I don't know. There's a lot of questions, but trying to pin down the physicality of them extracting these robots or androids or whatever to have these interrogations and then putting them back without anyone noticing is sketchy, to say the least.
Yeah, it is more believable to think that these interrogation scenes happen in some different time period than to try and put together how they recovered them, between these scenes. Like,
I mean, people in the chat room are we're live broadcasting this, right? People in the chat room are like, obviously it's a cybernetic link or VR or something like that. But I mean, what we have seen is some of the robots, the androids, physically there. They're actually there because
Ford, like, cuts into one of their faces, right?
Yeah, Ford cuts in their faces, or, like, the damaged ones are there. So, like, sometimes these interrogation scenes are with damaged robots, and sometimes they're a VR link. Like, that's sketchy storytelling. In my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. I think the interrogations are all happening at a different timeline. They're strategically placed in these episodes to deceive you into thinking that it's all one same timeline. So it's kind of annoying, but whatever. We see through you, Westworld, and hopefully we're right. Otherwise, the smugness is for no reason whatsoever. But but basically, William says the next reason. He says, "Yesterday you seemed out of sorts." That is how her passing out is conveyed.
Right.
Who knows what happened that night? He says, "Yesterday you seemed out of sorts. You feeling better this morning?" She says, "I had trouble dreams, but I feel more myself now." So that's how that is dismissed. So then, what happens? Later on, they go to meet El Lazo. It is Lawrence. And earlier on in the episode, we had seen the Man in Black kill and hang Lawrence.
And drain him.
And drain his blood and to put his blood into Teddy's body, I guess. And that is a big moment, Joanna. And I felt like it should have been bigger. I felt like there should have been some big reveal. But certainly it really knocked me off my feet when I saw it because this whole time, Joanna, you've been advocating this two-timeline theory. I've had various levels of skepticism about it. First I was on board, then I was off board, then I was back on again. And it seems with this reveal of Lawrence that that is some pretty strong evidence that this is taking place in two different timelines, and that the Logan and William, like either Logan or William, and we'll get to who it is later in this podcast, becomes the Man in Black later. Like, do you feel like the Lawrence reveal, the only other explanation of why Lawrence would be there at Pariah, at this town that's like theoretically far removed from anything else going on in the park, is that either there's duplicate versions of hosts, as I already mentioned, which I thought would be a confusing gaming experience, or number two, like that the Man in Black storyline takes place separately from the William and Logan storyline, but that it is days and not 30 years, right? That maybe he kills Lawrence and then the techs recover Lawrence's body and then they replace him back in Pariah, right?
Right.
Now that also doesn't explain, like, I guess why Lawrence appears to be on an earlier part of his loop than maybe they just reset him to the start of his loop, And Ed Harris, when we first meet Lawrence in the show, was interacting with him on a later part of his loop, right?
Right. Once he'd been caught. And
and he's about to be hanged. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that to me it confirms, it confirms the two timeline theory to the point that any argument now is you trying to convince me it's not.
Yeah.
Two timelines. I'm no longer trying to convince you it is. You have to convince me it's not. And plenty of people have with the Lawrence El Lazo thing in the last, 12 hours since the episode aired. They're like, well, they get to Pariah during the daytime. They have to wait until the next day to meet El Lazo. That's why we see the Day of the Dead parade and stuff like that.
Right.
And so in theory, the techs could have taken him then, cleaned him up, put more blood back in him, give him some fresh clothing, but the same clothing, and put him back in the storyline. But like what doesn't quite track for me is like El Lazo was already established as a character. Like they were on their way to meet El Lazo, and it's possible that like if the Man in Black hadn't killed him, then when they got to Pariah, they've been like, oh, El Lazo's gone. Like, like that's possible,
Right.
But it just doesn't seem probable to me. Like all these things seems like people have to now work harder to convince me that there is one solitary timeline. And we can get to this or not if we have time, but I actually think there's more than two timelines. But the Lawrence thing for me seals two timelines.
The burden of proof is now on the non-two timeline believers.
That's
right?
what I think. Yeah.
So we are rapidly running out of time. Like we got to finish up in the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to fast forward past some of this stuff. But basically, they go on a mission to steal some nitroglycerin for the Confederados. We see the heist. Logan just starts messing with people, and William just kills people to save Logan's life. Some questions here that we'll come back to in just a bit about like what damage the park will allow hosts to do to guests, but we'll get to that because Logan is being choked, right?
Yeah,
and he seems to really be feeling it. It doesn't seem like he's play choking. Anyway, so they go back to Pariah. Lawrence, gives the Confederados the nitroglycerin, and he's like, you guys could use that now, but why not have a night of celebration? And they go to this like Caligula-esque orgy room that appears, right? And you point out here in the show notes that the song is 9 Inch Nails' Something I Could Never Have. Dolores and William, this is like... this is like when you're at prom and you and your date are so awkward and uncomfortable, you're not even dancing, you're just standing off to the side. It's like that, except instead of people dancing, they're having an orgy. It felt very awkward. But you point out here also that HBO got into some amount of controversy for the amount of sexual content that was included in the show, right? Like there were some news stories I read last year about how what they were asking of their background artists was a little bit extreme, right?
Yeah, SAG-AFTRA got upset with HBO. HBO then put it on Central Casting, but basically Central Casting said actors will be required to take part in graphic sexual situations, including genital-to-genital touching and simulated oral sex with hand-to-genital touching, which I think is beyond what SAG-AFTRA sort of like allows you to ask an extra to do. And so... HBO got slapped on the wrist for that, and then HBO was like, nope, it wasn't us, it was central casting. So, but what that story meant is that we all knew a massive orgy was coming in Westworld season 1. So here it is, the orgy.
Yeah. Also, according to Deadline, the more than 50 naked extras taking part in the filming are being well paid for touching one another's genitals and such, up to $600. I assume that's per day, according to a source familiar with the shoot. So. That is how much people in the background got paid to simulate that they were having sex. A lot of awesome background information you're finding on this Decoding Westworld podcast. So what else happens? Logan and William have this big fight, right? Because William, let's be honest, Joanna Robinson, William has been kind of a downer this trip, right? Every time Logan is like, let's do this fun thing, William has been kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Let's rape this. Let's shoot this. Oh, William, why are you such a wet blanket?
Yeah, let's put our dick in this. Let's kill this. William just doesn't want to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And they have this confrontation where Logan basically calls him out on being not super manly. I'll read a little bit of the dialogue here. You remember the day when you finally got those 3 fancy letters? EVP, Executive Vice President. You walked into my office in that cheap black suit of yours, and you shook my hand, and you thanked me for the opportunity. That was the best day of your life. End quote. Basically talking about how, like, that's all William can aspire to. Also gives a little bit of info on the power dynamic. Like, William is obviously coming at this from the outsider perspective, and Logan's family is the one that's very powerful. But, Logan's mocking William, saying like, "Hey, you have very few aspirations in life, and you're not ambitious enough. You're not enough of a person to not only like aspire to more, but like just even enjoy life." And then William's about to mess up Logan, and then stops. He stops, and Logan's like, "Just like I thought," like confirming Logan's belief that William is a wimp. Yeah. I thought this was a pretty cool scene, and kind of does a good job of conveying the dynamic between them, and also very interesting that it's set at an orgy as well. So, any other thoughts on this dynamic? Anything you want to highlight from it?
I guess I have to say I do want to take a moment and say that I think all of the actors on this show are incredible, except I think Ben Barnes is like the weakest link as Logan. And I get it that Logan's kind of a cardboard villain, but I think we were seeing just better shading on the other characters than this particular one. So it might not be writing. It might be the writing. It may not be Ben Barnes, but
it feels like the writing to me because he seems a little bit cartoonish, right?
He's also tasked, as you said, with a lot of exposition dump. Like he had to give Park exposition dump, and then he just had to give William's backstory basically in an exposition dump. So it's some tricky writing that he has to pull off. But I think Ben Barnes, just from what I've seen, like him do elsewhere, I'm not convinced that he's like the best actor in the whole world. He's fine. He's fine, but it just feels like two-dimensional, I think. And I think what we're seeing, and we'll see it, as William and Dolores skip town, but what we're seeing is William being seduced by the Park in his own way, right? Like in that heist where he shoots people, like he does it for a virtuous reason, but he also like kind of likes it, right? It seems like to me, and with Dolores as this like strong, fiery woman who like won't be the damsel but needs him anyway. Like he's being seduced by narrative, which just means the Park knows how to get you one way or another, I think, right? Yeah. If it's not going to get you with like gold painted whores, then it's going to get you with someone like Dolores. So that's
I just kept thinking like, man, that firstly, obviously getting painted would be uncomfortable, but like I don't know if I'd want to have sex with someone who is painted, like it just seems like it would be awkward and weird. Was I the only one that had that thought, Joanna?
I don't know. I guess you just haven't had enough James Bond fantasies in your life.
Yeah, that really ended well for that character that was painted in James Bond.
I always think of is Buddy Ebsen, right, who was in The Wizard of Oz, who got painted silver and had an allergic reaction because he was originally cast as the Tin Man, had to go to the hospital. They recast him because he couldn't tolerate the makeup, and they used new makeup. But I always think that anytime someone's full body painted, I was like, is someone going to go to the hospital over this?
Yeah, I would be like, if I was in that situation, I would be so concerned about the person who was painted. Yeah. I'd be like, are you comfortable? Like, do you want to wash that off first? Anyway. All right. So what happens is we also see that El Lazo replaces the nitroglycerin with it seems to be alcohol, and he's going to use it for his own purposes. And then this ruse is discovered. They start beating up on Logan, and William runs away with Dolores and gets onto this train car that has El Lazo in it. I do want to point out that before they get away, Logan gives William this look like, save me, and William just declines to do so. And Logan kind of gives this smile, like, hey, you finally become a man, and you're now self-actualizing, and you have become a bastard like me.
Yeah, and I don't even think it was like pride. It was like, we got you. That's what it looked like to me.
Right.
Like the park got you. I got you.
Right.
And the other thing I want to say, about harming a guest.
Yeah, because Logan is being wailed on. He's being injured grievously, it seems, during this scene.
We saw in episode 2 when William was getting his sort of like intake with the host in the white dress, played by Tallulah Riley, that she asked him a lot of questions, and he was like, "Why?" And she said, "Well, we want to like figure out, how much pain you can tolerate, something like that." And he's like, "Oh, I thought you couldn't get hurt." She's like, "Oh, well, as much as you can take," or something like saucier like that.
Uh-huh.
So basically, I think that Logan probably has his pain tolerance dialed way up, because I think we saw him get like some pain also in his sex scene in Sweetwater. So like I think he's like, "Yep, beat me up. I'm into it. I'm here for it." Whereas other people might be like, "Yeah, please don't even touch me. Thank you." So that's my take on it. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And theoretically, Logan would have his pain tolerance is probably set pretty high as a veteran of the park. So yeah, I think that sounds right to me. It does kind of conflict with this idea that the host couldn't hurt anyone, and like them not hurting flies was kind of a big part of episode 1. But maybe the park has just changed in 30 years too, Joanna. That's another possibility, right?
True.
Anyway, so
well, I did have that theory that I think I floated to you like 2 weeks ago off air about, we were talking about the difference between bullets that hit William and bullets that hit the Man in Black.
Right, like maybe bullet technology has advanced in 30 years, right?
Right. That like William gets bruised and the Man in Black is fine, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's just because he's been shot a lot." But like maybe they've just made their bullets smarter, and they don't hurt you as much in 30 years. Whoa. Okay, go ahead.
You just blew my mind, Joanna. Okay, so Man in Black stuff. Lawrence and the Man in Black, they are still interact in this episode, and then the Man in Black concludes that like Lawrence is not going to be the one to bring him to the destination. It's going to be Teddy.
Yeah.
Because like they need to get to Wyatt, and Teddy knows how to get to Wyatt. It's this relatively new question mark plot line that's been introduced into Teddy and into the park. They encounter young Anthony Hopkins.
We assume
young Anthony Hopkins, who we also assume is a host. And
I think we know he's a host just because we see him obey
commands.
Anthony Hopkins. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But whether or not he's young Anthony Hopkins, we don't know yet.
Yeah, and then the Man in Black uses Lawrence's blood to revive Teddy. So, like, a lot of stuff going on in this scene. Like, what are some important takeaways in your opinion?
That like the technology in Westworld is crazy. That okay, so this is a thing that a lot of people want to talk about. The robots now, apparently, according to the Man in Black's info dump, they're organic, and I mean they've got some circuitry in them, but largely organic. We've seen them be constructed like by like 3D printer in the lab, and that the Man in Black says initially they were circuitry inside, million perfect pieces. I think he said.
Yeah.
And
he also says, quote, "You used to be beautiful. When this place started, I opened one of you up once, million little perfect pieces. Then they changed you, made you this sad, real mess, flesh and bone, just like us. They said it would improve the park experience, but all they really did it for was it was cheaper."
Right. So a lot of people who are looking to argue against the two timeline theory are saying that the way we can track where we are is the tech in the robots. Are they circuitry based or are they organic based? But what I want to say is I believe the robots that we see, and this is, I mean, I'll confess to you, this is based on things I've seen in the trailer for like the season long of Westworld, where they showed. So I don't think it's totally cheating. Where they showed like how some of the older robots were constructed. Like you see Evan Rachel Wood's like sort of face being put on a circuitry body. And so it's flesh over circuitry. So when you see William shoot robots and blood comes out, to me that doesn't mean necessarily that they're the modern organic robots. There was still the appearance of organics in the 30 years ago. So that's my take. I could be wrong. You guys could be right. There's clearly is a difference between old Bill, who's like herky-jerky mechanic, versus Dolores and Maeve and all that sort of thing. But we'll see as we go forward. But I don't consider the circuitry versus organic to necessarily disqualify the two timeline theory.
That's fair enough. I think there's some dispute about old Bill looks like so much less advanced than any of the other robots that have happened. And so theoretically, if the incident with Arnold happened 34 years prior to modern day storyline, and then Logan and William is within that time period, right? Then the stuff with old Bill must have happened like way long ago. It must have been when Arnold was still alive that old Bill was deployed, right?
Right, because like old Bill looks even like way older and less advanced than the robots we saw in flashback. You know, when Ford was talking about the construction of the park, we see them dancing, and then we see them sort of like later traumatically scratched in the lab.
Yeah.
Like they all look like they look now. Someone was like, they're jerkily dancing. I'm like, no, they're learning how to dance. They're not like robotically learning how to dance. They don't know how to dance, but they have human-like behavior. They all look way more advanced than old Bill. So I feel like old Bill was like an early model that never even got deployed in the park. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but it's a curious question.
Yeah, because it's not clean. The 30-year, like, this thing is taking place in two different timelines. It's not super clean, in my opinion.
No, I agree.
There are some problems, including like when was old Bill deployed in relation to William and Logan's time period, if it was in fact 30 years ago. And also, how does that square with the flashbacks with young Anthony Hopkins? Like, young Anthony Hopkins must have been 50 years ago then. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on there? So, all right. Then, I'm going to just fast forward to the end of this plot line and say Man in Black and Ford have a confrontation, right? It's pretty intense, and it's an awesome confrontation because it reminded me of like the scene in the cafe in Heat with like Al Pacino and De Niro, where it's just like these two acting titans coming together and like having this like tense meeting, and also in the reality of the universe, they're very important people as well, right? So they Ford just wants to know what is going on. The Man in Black explains to him. Firstly, it's revealed that the Man in Black is just making up this part about Dolores to get Teddy into the game, right?
Yeah.
When Ford says, that last part doesn't sound familiar. I thought that was a funny little bit. But anyway, the Man in Black says, Wyatt, on the other hand, that's something new. Is he just another stooge for the tourists to mount on their wall at home, or have you finally made a worthy adversary? Someone to stop me from finding the center of the maze. And what is it you're hoping to find there, Ford asks. You know why you exist, Teddy? The world out there, the one you'll never see, was one of plenty. A fat, soft teat people cling to their entire life. Every need taken care of except one. Purpose. Meaning. So they come here, they can be a little scared, a little thrilled, enjoy some sweetly affirmative bullshit, and then they take a fucking picture and they go back home. But I think there's a deeper meaning hiding under all that. Something the person who created it wanted to express. Something true. So, yeah, that's what the Man in Black indicates he's trying to find. I also like how the Man in Black threatens Ford in this scene, and then Teddy, just seemingly out of like reflex, grabs his knife and plunges it into the table, showing how kind of omnipotent Ford is. We kind of saw a little bit of that when he controlled all those hosts effortlessly, and now can do the same thing with Teddy. Like maybe there's some built-in subroutine or whatever.
I don't think it's that. I think it's we talked about this earlier. The Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Nolan said that there's this good Samaritan reflex in the robots, that anytime you see a guest wanting to harm another guest, a host will step in and intercede. And because we've talked over and over again about like how do you prevent host on host violence within the park, and their thing was like, well, all the robots will throw themselves in the way of harm if they need to, and that's exactly what Teddy does, right? He de-escalates the situation by taking the knife, and so like it might be Ford controlling him, but I think this is also just an example of something they promised us, which is that the robots have a reflex to stop hosts from guests from harming other guests.
All right, but Joanna, let me make you a bet, okay? Let's say you're someone who doesn't read those interviews. Maybe I would wager we're never going to see this happen again, like for the rest of the season, like with someone that's not Ford. Like, I just don't think that it's going to be a major plot point, and therefore the one impression we're going to be left with is that Ford is incredibly powerful. That's my... I'm going to go on the limb and say...
Great,
like,
I'll take that bet.
All right.
Sure. But I think the other thing that's
I'll be proven wrong next episode.
I think the other thing that's important to note in this scene is that, to me, is that knife. Someone, I think, and I thought this before someone sent me something. Someone sent me something I'm not going to talk about. It's not a spoiler, but I don't think I should talk about it. But, like, to me, that knife is flashing around in a way in that scene that told me to look for that knife again. So, that's what I'll say. A Chekhov's knife with a distinctive handle. So
yeah, and the kind of blade structure is...
Yeah, and I think Ford looks at the knife as if, like, I've seen this before. That's what it looked like to me in that scene. Rewatch it, let me know what you think. But it looks to me like Ford's like, oh, this old thing. Great. Here it is again. So we'll see.
But the reason I make that, going back to the bet I made about like we're never going to see that good Samaritan reflex again, it feels like in that interview they were writing checks they couldn't cash. Is what I'm saying. I'm going to put that out there as like that. The reason we see it in this episode is just again to convey how amazingly powerful Ford is and how much control he exerts over his entire creation. Anyway, so
I think the other thing I want to note in this scene is, two things. One, the adversary. I'm just going to lay out another theory right here. I don't think the adversary is Wyatt. I think the adversary is Dolores. I think she's going to be the ultimate weapon against the Man in Black if the Man in Black is William. We saw in this episode William, like, really enthralled by Dolores. So I think Dolores is a weakness for the Man in Black if the Man in Black is William. That's my one prediction. She's the adversary that Ford is deploying to take the Man in Black down. The other thing I want to say in this scene is if the Man in Black is William, I thought what Ford said about how the Man in Black's villainy is fueled by anxiety really reminded me of Logan taunting William. Like, he's just picking at his insecurities to try to get a rise out of him, the same way we saw earlier in the episode. So those are two things I want to note in that scene, and that's all.
All right. Well, I want to get more to the William Man in Black connection later if we have time, but a couple things with Elsie that happened this episode. She's working on Bart, a naked black host. You've written a note here in the show notes. I'm not going to read it out loud, but can you explain what this is?
Oh, Wesley Morris, a brilliant writer who currently works for the New York Times.
Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, yep.
Wrote a piece last week that a lot of people were talking about called The Last Taboo, I believe it was called.
Yes.
And it's a great piece. You should read it. And when I had already seen this episode when I read it, and I was wondering if he had already seen this episode. It's about, the subtitle is why pop culture just can't deal with black male sexuality. And it's all about black penises on screen and when they're shown and how they're shown and the scarcity with which they're shown, or that they can never be shown in a way that isn't about stereotypes about male sexuality. And so here we have, a black penis in this scene, and Elsie is making jokes about his impressive talent. So I was watching, when I read Wesley Morris's article, I was wondering if he'd seen this episode, and then I was also wondering what he would think of this scene. So that's all.
Yeah. And this is presumably a time in our human history when we have overcome that taboo, I guess. But yeah,
Well, I don't know. I think it plays into what Morris is saying about like you can't show a black cock without it being some sort of joke about. Sorry if my language is too foul for people. Without it being like highly sexualized, whereas you can show a naked white person like in repose. It doesn't have to be about sexuality. It can just be about a naked person.
I see.
That we're not quite there yet with black actors. And yeah, so read the article. Wesley makes the points much better than I ever would. So do that.
Gotcha.
If you want to read this article.
I mean, I think it's notable at all that it is shown, at all. Which, like, the vast majority of shows on TV couldn't or wouldn't do. But your point is taken that it is kind of rendered as not necessarily a joke, but certainly not a point to be taken seriously in this episode.
Just that we've seen, like, Abernathy naked, and, like, it didn't have to be about, his sexuality or something like that. Do you know? Like, I don't know. I'm not offended. I'm just curious how this fits in to the larger narrative of something that a lot of people were talking about last week. So
then Elsie decides she needs to get to the bottom of this whole situation with the host who caved in his own head. She goes down to the lab technician level and blackmails a guy who's been having sex with unconscious hosts into allowing her access. Where she then pulls out a device that is apparently sending data out of the park to who knows what for what knows, is completely unaware. I am pretty uninterested in the storyline right now. I'll just say there's so little information here that I don't really. Sure, I could spin myself up on a lot of theorizing, but who cares? In my opinion, if the show does more to establish why we should care, then maybe. But is this something you're particularly interested in?
I'm intrigued by it, certainly, but I think the other mysteries are more compelling to me right now. Yeah.
There is a concern. I was reading Matt Singer's recap of this episode about how the show is still introducing mysteries in episode 5 and not doing much to wrap existing mysteries up.
Yeah.
Right? And that's kind of a concern because we're already halfway through the season. So finally,
this is at least this is a continuation of the mystery of this woodcutter going off his it's not a brand new mystery. It's a further development in why that particular host went up into the mountains.
Yeah,
right?
I guess that's right. And I guess, there's this whole mystery of what the Delos Corporation is actually doing. And presumably this satellite uplink is related to that, right? That there's some kind of corporate espionage going on. So...
But I certainly would not disagree with Matt Singer or with you or anyone else that Westworld is setting up writing a lot of checks that it better be able to cash. Yeah.
So then the final scene in the episode, we see these two lab technicians and they're hanging out, they're talking. Maeve had come alive earlier they're working together, and we find out Asian lab technician, a.k.a. Felix, is trying to repair a bird in the park, I guess, as a side project to try and prove that he can code or potentially work somewhere else other than the bowels of the park. And at the end, Maeve comes alive. It's a really shocking moment, and she knows Felix's name, so it indicates that she was probably alive throughout many of her previous cleanings, right? Because she could not only was she conscious, but she could comprehend what was happening and knew how to separate the reality of Westworld from the reality of her, being in this situation. So we'll find out more about what she has to say to Felix next week. Any other thoughts on this Maeve situation before we dive into theories?
I have to say, of all the storylines that are going on right now, I'm most intrigued by Maeve. I'm most excited to see what happens with Tandy Newton backstage at Westworld. I think it's going to be interesting. So, yeah.
Should be fun. So, that is our recap for this episode. Now, a lot of theory stuff we got to follow up on. Probably too much. Firstly, wanted to read this email from Chris from Commerce, Texas, who writes in about the quote, used by Ford to whip Teddy back into shape after talking with the Man in Black. Look back and smile at perils past is a quote from Sir Walter Scott's The Bridal of Triermain, which, according to Wikipedia, celebrates the exploits of a knight-errant, Sir Roland de Vaux, as he seeks to rescue and hopefully espouse a beautiful maiden, Gwyneth. Gwyneth is the illegitimate daughter of King Arthur, doomed by Merlin 500 years previously to an enchanted sleep inside a magic castle. In other words, it's basically a Sleeping Beauty story. An errant knight comes to save a beautiful maiden from her deep and dreamless slumber, a.k.a. her enchanted sleep. I doubt this quote is a coincidence. So that email comes in from Chris from Commerce, Texas. Thought that was an interesting reference to what's going on with Ford and Teddy in that confrontation they have. All right. We got a lot of emails and a lot of tweets and a lot of things that irritated you, and including myself. Like, I thought this a bunch of times. That maybe if this is taking place 30 years apart, that it's actually Logan who becomes the Man in Black and not William. And you do not like this theory, Joanna.
Yeah, I don't want to classify it as irritating me. It's certainly not like a Sansa pregnancy situation. I just think, like, I hear you guys. I hear you saying you think it's Logan is the Man in Black, but, like, what a lot of people are saying is, like, doesn't it make more sense for Logan to be the Man in Black since he's, like, a black hat and a bad guy, and the Man in Black is a black hat and a bad guy? And I'm like, no. In my opinion, it's better storytelling if you start out one way and you end a different way. And it's more, I think, heartbreaking and upsetting for us to see William start out as a good guy with good intentions and to become whatever it is Ed Harris has become. And even if Ed Harris is not like as villainous as maybe we originally thought he was, like, I'm reconsidering the whole what we thought was a rape scene in the first episode. I don't think it was. I think it's him trying to get information from Dolores. So I don't think that he becomes like as evil as maybe the show led you to believe. But I think it's I don't want to say dramatic irony, but it's interesting storytelling to me to watch William go along, watch him get seduced, as we are seeing, into some violence, cheating on his fiance a little bit by kissing Dolores, which, originally he thought he was too good for, like all this sort of thing, to see the park work its, magic on him and what that turns him into. Like, I think we're headed towards something terrible happening to William, and it's going to make him bitter for the rest of his life. And he's either going to keep returning to the park to try to recapture something that he found in Dolores, found there, or try to destroy it, which is what it seems like he's at the point now, trying to destroy it. But that's my take on why I feel like it has to be William. Dave, do you want to hit me with a counter argument?
I think my counter argument is that you're right, so it's really a terrible counter argument in the sense that you're right. That is better storytelling. Like, that is more interesting from a character arc perspective. But it does kind of make sense if Logan is the Man in Black. Like, maybe the thing that happens is like something horrible happens to William, and it causes Logan to be even more extreme and aggro than he already is, right? And like, that could be interesting. Not as interesting as what you said, but still pretty interesting. Also, Logan's already kind of a dick, and the Man in Black is kind of a dick as well, and so they kind of matches up. Like, it makes sense, and they both wear similar clothes already. So, like, I can see why people would draw that conclusion, and I don't think it's totally narratively unsatisfying, is what I would say. But I agree, your way is much better. I can see it the other way as well. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying I think I would like the story better, and obviously it's not my story to tell, but I'd like it better if we see this happen to William.
Yeah. Random other question, by the way, that I didn't bring up. Like, there's all this nitroglycerin in the car at the end with William and Dolores, like in the train, and Dolores like puts the gun to the nitroglycerin, the guy's body filled with nitroglycerin. What happens if she pulls the trigger? Like, hosts, we've already seen earlier, like, that you need to request a pyrotechnic effect.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So. But maybe this was at a time in the park when they were playing more fast and loose with the rules, right?
Maybe,
if it was 30 years ago, maybe hosts could initiate pyrotechnic effect. Like, what happens if does William die? Like, is there a small fire that William easily survives? Like, I just am very curious about.
These are great questions.
What's going on there? Anyway, all right. So, Joanna Robinson, let's get to your theory. from last night because not satisfied to simply accept victory and move on, as many of us would do. Joanna Robinson decided to dance on the graves of those who did not like the this Westworld is taking place in two different timelines theory by advocating another theory on top of the two timelines theory, right? And what is that theory, Joanna?
Well, basically it has to do with, we've been talking for several weeks now about the idea of Bernard being a host. And I think when I originally brought it up, or at least in episode 3, I think it was, we talked about Bernard's similarities to Arnold. At one point, I keep bringing up Matt Patches because he's one of the people that I talk to a lot, and he's doing some great work on Thrillist over the show. He was talking to me about all the different characters, and I was like, just how many dead kids are we talking about? Like, how many people have dead kids? Because, that's narratively sloppy to me. And so that's what first started me thinking that Arnold and Bernard are the same person. Is, if you're dealing with two people who are dealing with, devastating loss, I feel like maybe it's just one person. But the biggest evidence against that I talked about at the time was that photo that Ford shows Bernard. He shows him a photo and is clearly not the actor Jeffrey Wright in that photo with him. So, Bernard's an android. Bernard has the consciousness of Arnold. That's what I was working with. But then I remembered that we've seen the hosts, the robots, the androids, look at things that they're not supposed to recognize and not recognize anything. So when Dolores sees the Times Square photo, she says, that looks like nothing to me. So I'm wondering if maybe we saw what Bernard, the android, was seeing, and if we'll see that photo later and it will actually have Jeffrey Wright in the image instead of that weird face we saw. This is really complicated.
In a Fight Club-esque reveal, we'll find out that the photo we saw of Arnold is actually of Bernard.
Right. And so the reason I say this is because it just doesn't make sense to me. Arnold seems so important. It doesn't make sense to me that it would be that random face who's not an actor that we recognize. So, some rando is going to play Arnold. I'm very dissatisfied with that.
Yeah.
And I think I will be more satisfied if it turns out to be someone we know, or at least an actor we recognize, and by recognize, I mean, those of us who obsessively watch too much film and television recognize. So if it's Jeffrey Wright, that makes sense to me. And if that's true...
So let's just be clear. The theory is that Bernard is not only a robot with the consciousness of Arnold, but that, in fact, Bernard looks like Arnold as well.
Right, a clone of Arnold.
He's a clone of Arnold.
Right, right. Because, and one of the reasons that I bring this up is, HBO is dumping all this extra material on this Westworld website that you can go and spend hours and hours and hours exploring. And one of the things on there is the Delos Terms of Service, which says that any physical material you leave behind you in the park, meaning your sperm, your skin cells, your whatever, can be used by Delos for whatever they want in perpetuity, which to me means cloning. That's what that means to me. If you leave your DNA behind, we can use it for whatever we want. What would you want to use it for? To me, it means cloning. We also assume, as Dave Chen brought up earlier in the episode, we assume that the young kid we see in the park is a young clone of Anthony Hopkins. So cloning to me is already in the mix. I know this all sounds super crackpot, but I'm getting to the point. The point is, to me, this explains those Bernard-Dolores conversations, which are so confusing to me as to when they're taking place.
Yep.
And what I'm saying is that when we see Dolores in her blue dress and it's just her and Bernard talking in this side exam room that nobody knows about, maybe that's actually the original human Arnold talking to Dolores right at the beginning of the park. And the maze, he brings up the maze, Arnold's the one who created the maze. Why would Bernard know about the maze, or even be tasking Dolores with the maze? So Bernard bringing it up doesn't make sense to me. Arnold bringing it up does. So that's why, I think we're dealing with at least 3 timelines: pre-William, William, post-William, the end.
Oh, snap. Oh, snap. So when you told me this, firstly, we'll link to this in the show notes so people can read about this. But this is a batshit insane theory. I mean, in order for this to be true, you need to believe that when you saw the photo of Arnold, you're seeing the photo of Arnold from Bernard's perspective. Right?
Yeah, which is a cheat. Like, I agree. It's a big cheat.
That is a big cheat. But you're right that those Dolores sequences are pretty weird, and we don't know when they're taking place. And it would be an even bigger mindfuck if it was, in fact, Arnold that was actually talking with Dolores during those times. I agree it would be, like, the show is laying track that for it to be true, like, it would be kind of satisfying. And I also said this to Joanna, this is not the first insane theory that she's had, and a lot of her theories have turned out to be correct. So I don't know if I'm quite on board with this theory, but I'm probably on the fence. I'm probably 50-50 on this one.
Yeah, that's fair. That's more than I deserve, probably.
And so we'll link to the show notes. You can read all about it. Here's the bigger concern for me, Joanna, okay? And Alan Sepinwall wrote about this. Other people have written about this. Is we are now entering a situation where every aspect of the show needs to be viewed through the lens of the two-timeline theory. Meaning that if the two-timeline theory is true, it completely changes Dolores' narrative arc, right? She is no longer a host who is slowly becoming human. She's a host who's becoming human who then gets totally reset later on. And, like, all that work is theoretically, like, completely erased. And, yeah, there's a kind of very Memento-esque tragedy to that where, like, a host needs to then return to her loop even after undergoing this crazy journey of self-discovery. But, you know, it's not the same thing as a host actually going on that journey of self-discovery and maybe breaking free of the bonds of her creators.
Yeah, so I talked about this a couple weeks ago about how if the Nolans are so enamored of a mystery that they're really bugging with what we think we're seeing, intentionally misleading us, like really, really, like just in a really heavy-handed way, how that does mess with our perception of character arc, of narrative progression, of all these sort of things. So this weekend I went and rewatched The Prestige, because I think that's the best example of the Nolans pulling off a twist that I did not see coming. And a twist to hide a second twist. Basically, you get the Christian Bale reveal and the Hugh Jackman reveal. And, like, I concluded two things. One, if The Prestige were a 6-episode miniseries, Reddit would have figured out the twist by episode 2. They would have freeze framed Christian Bale under that makeup and been like, oh, by the way, that's Christian Bale. You know, like, so there's no way you can sustain something like they did in The Prestige over 10 episodes of an HBO show or 5 seasons of an HBO show, right? I think, with Reddit being as clever and active as it is. The second thing is, does the twist of The Prestige change what you do have to rewatch The Prestige, and every single scene you're like, okay, that's that Christian Bale, okay, that's his, sorry, spoilers for The Prestige again, like, that's his twin brother, like, that's Christian Bale, that's his twin brother. Like, doing that, knowing that does change. You have to watch it twice. And so I feel like people are going to want to watch Westworld twice, or they're going to throw in the towel and be like, screw you for this, you know? So I'm curious to see what the reaction is if the two-timeline theory is true.
I think either way, you're playing a dangerous game these days if you are doing a show that's 10 episodes long and where you're building up to this big reveal. Like, anytime you attempt something like that, you are playing with fire. Because if, in fact, the twist is discerned in the first 3 episodes, which I don't think they were anticipating, then the whole buildup is going to be pretty anticlimactic. In other words, if they don't reveal the two timelines as true until, let's say, episode 8, 9, or 10, we've already been living with this for a month or 2 months at that point, right? And what could they possibly show us that would be satisfying at that point? Like, I guarantee you, if the reveal doesn't happen until episode 9, the way they do it will not be sathing to us. Is my guess. Because it's going to seem like, oh, well, I already knew that for the last 6 weeks. So they're not going to be able to do it in a way that makes it mind-blowing, unless, of course, your thing is also true, right? And that's what The Prestige does, right? It distracts you with one twist,
I mean, I don't consider the Hugh Jackman reveal in The Prestige to be like a twist necessarily, but it is
Right.
like a big shocking moment.
Yeah.
So you're already dealing with the Christian Bale reveal as they reveal the Hugh Jackman thing. So like a twist to hide a bigger twist is, I think, a Nolan-esque thing to do, and so that's why I was looking for, like, after I watched The Prestige, and I was like, okay, let's say two timelines is right. Let's say Bernard is an android. What's a further twist that they're going to drop on me later on? Which is how I got to this like Arnold thing.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that there's probably nothing they can do in episode 9 and 10 for us to be like, whoa, but, unless it's Mars, guys, whoa, but, is that the Nolan's fault? Or is it the fault of how we watch TV now? And you and I went on a big like discussion about theorizing and speculation and what it's doing, and like maybe it would have been better for for Westworld to be like a binge model thing when we wouldn't have time to pick it apart. And so when we got, like I watched those first 4 episodes, it never occurred to me that there was 2 timelines. Like if it were not for Reddit, it would never have occurred to me. So I probably would have gotten to the end and I would have been like, whoa, because we're not,
but would
dissecting it on a week by week basis.
would it have occurred to you if you saw this episode? Is the question.
I have no idea.
Right.
I
Because
no
when you see
idea.
Lawrence and he's breathing fine and has all his blood in him, maybe it's like, hey, there's something fishy going on here.
Maybe.
Right?
Maybe it would have been like my first inkling, but that's 5 episodes in, my first inkling, as opposed to episode 2, someone on Reddit's like, boom, the logos are different, bro. So that's my really bad impression of a Redditor. They're not
Nice.
like that.
Good job.
But yeah, I wonder, like, do we want to fault the Nolans? Maybe we want to fault the Nolan. I mean, Jonathan Nolan has already, or Jonah Nolan, if you want to call him, like, has already run a TV show on CBS that a lot of people like, Person of Interest. I never watched it, but a lot of people who love it consider it a well plotted show with a plan. They've been telling me this for weeks and trying to get me to watch it. I'm not going to watch Person of Interest, but apparently that's their evidence that Jonah Nolan can pull something like this off. But do we want to say that maybe they underestimated how twisty their twists would be? Because they didn't think that the TV audience would catch on this quickly. Casey Bloys, HBO president of programming, Casey Bloys said this last week in an interview that fans are getting close with their theories. That's why also I think, like, if you think there's 2 timelines...
That was before he read your article, though, right?
Yeah, and then he was like, whoa, no! Yeah, I don't know. So, all right.
I agree that your article and that theory would truly be mind-blowing, I think. I think if they were able to pull off, like you said, a twist to hide another twist, that would truly be mind-blowing. But I do think they do bear some of the blame, because anytime like your entire season hinges on a big reveal, if that reveal is deciphered too quickly, you're putting yourself in jeopardy of like people not being able to appreciate other aspects of your show, or not being able to even understand what you're trying to do with other aspects of your show, unless they have a repeat viewing. So I do think they have some responsibility, because, like, yeah, if there is a big twist coming, if the 2 timelines twist is coming, then they're probably putting it near the end, and they knew that going in. They knew they're going to hinge the entire season on this, and they knew they took that risk going in, and it might burn them.
It might. Once again, I rewatch The Prestige. Not you, people listening, or you if you want to, because it's a great movie, but also because to look at how they reveal, how they flash back through the whole movie to reveal to you what you just saw. They do it very quickly and efficiently. But I'm like, there's no way they can flash back through 10 hours of TV to be like, well, here she was in the future and here she was in the past. Like,
right. There's just too many
much.
instances.
Like, I mean, maybe they'll pull it off. And if they do, I promise you I'll give them a round of applause. But I'm really worried about how they're going to reveal this to a way in which the casual viewer who's not listening to podcasts or reading Reddit, like, how is the casual viewer going to take all this in? I'm curious how they serve it up in a clean, hopefully efficient way, if the 2 timeline theory is real.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah.
So a lot riding on this now. Like it is becoming this house of cards that is becoming more precarious with every single episode. And where it all goes, we don't know yet. But if we hope they can deliver on what they're setting up, because it does seem to be like it does seem like there's a lot of potential for some pretty, satisfying reveals. But it's going to be a fine line to walk. So, all right, I think we've run out of time. We're more than run out of time at this point. But Joanna Robinson, you want to let people know where you can find more of your work on the internet this week?
I mean, you can find me on Vanity Fair going down the rabbit hole about Westworld. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Wrote This. You can listen to me talk about Black Mirror this week on the Star Wars Spoilers podcast. And that's it.
And find all my stuff at davechen.me. You can email us at decodingwestworld@gmail.com and find more episodes of the show at decodingwestworld.com. I should point out one last thing, Joanna, before we wrap up, which is I had a chance to interview the director of Season 1, Episode 4, Vincenzo Natali, who directed Dissonance Theory. And he did not know if the two timelines theory is true. So the director of the 4th episode of the show was not aware if the two timelines theory is true. Now, you could take that as evidence that it's not true, or you could take that as evidence that they are very good, the showrunners, at protecting their secrets.
You should listen to the whole episode, the whole interview, because it's very, like, Vincenzo is so charming.
Yes.
Dave's a great interviewer. Like, it's a great episode of podcast. But I do want to say that, like, Vincenzo, like, he said, I don't know, but he also said, like, he was basically saying they keep everyone in the dark. Like, I'm curious, like, what the actors even know, to be honest with you.
Okay, but as you pointed out to me, Joanna, that is kind of messed up if even the director doesn't know, because if Dolores's arcs are taking place in two separate timelines, like, how can you need to know some things to know how to direct actors, or to, if you're an actor, to know how to behave, right? Like, you need to kind of know, I feel like, whether this is taking place at different times or not. I don't know. I don't have definitive, I don't have a good argument against that. It's just a gut feeling that if a director doesn't know, then how can they possibly make this into, like, a through line that is satisfying? You know?
I'm less inclined to get sort of fussed about Dolores, since she's like, if she's a robot who's resetting, then, like, you're probably right. But I am more, I don't know, I don't want to say upset, but I am more interested, like, let's say Jeffrey Wright is secretly an android. Like,
right.
If Bernard is an android, should the director know that? If the Man in Black's history is the William story, shouldn't the director know that that's what Ed Harris should be playing? You know, like, that's really interesting to me. So
I guess they don't have to know that. They don't technically have to know that, right? You could just say the Man in Black's like this, and William is like this. Here's William's motivation. Here's the Man in Black motivation. Go. That's all you need, but it feels wrong to me. Feels wrong. That's all I say. But listen to that whole interview. There's a lot of awesome tidbits with Vincenzo in there. So find that episode and many others at decodingwestworld.com. And we'll see you guys next week.